On the edge of a continent and the edge of history, a small group of settlers vanished without a trace. No fire, no footprints, only a single word carved in wood, CROATOAN, left behind like a whisper. What happened here? And why does the silence still echo? This isn't a tale of conquest or glory. It's a story woven from fog, from forest, from unanswered questions. A story that lingers in the spaces between fact and folklore, between dreams and memory. If immersive, slow storytelling helps quiet your thoughts, feel free to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there now? I'm always curious who else is wandering the night with me. Now, settle in. Let the sea winds rise and the world around you fall quiet, and join me as we trace the fading footprints of the lost colony. Night falls gently over the outer shores of North Carolina. A hush descends on Roanoke Island, draping the trees and sand in silver moonlight. In this stillness, every rustle of leaf and every distant ocean sigh feels alive with secrets. The salt breeze carries a hint of stories long past, and as the stars reflect on the dark water, one can almost hear whispers, faint and musical, riding the currents of air. These are whispers of memory and mystery, a soft chorus of questions that have lingered for centuries. This is the stage of an unsolved tale, a place where history and legend entwine beneath ancient oaks and swaying pines. The lost colony of Roanoke is more than a footnote of history. It is a lullaby of uncertainty that hums in the background of this quiet land. In the deep hours of twilight, the island seems to breathe with a life of its own, as if the very ground remembers. The old wooden beams of a vanished fort might still feel warm from fires that died out long ago, and the paths through the woods know the tread of those who disappeared. A gentle, mysterious dread hangs in the air, not a terror that startles, but a slow, wandering fear of the unknown. By day, Roanoke Island is serene and green, touched by sunlight and the chatter of birds. Yet by night, it transforms into a world of silhouettes and soft echoes. The tall grasses swish gently with each ghost of a breeze, sounding like footsteps that never truly arrive. Far off, a lone owl calls into the darkness, its haunting cry an unanswered question. In this hush, one's mind drifts easily back through time, imagining faint lights between the trees or figures moving silently along the shore. The imagination awakens in the absence of answers. In the timeless hush, Roanoke's very soil seems to remember. People say that sometimes on a moonless night, a light can be seen gliding through the trees, as if an unseen colonist still walks with a lantern, searching. Footprints appear in the sand dunes at dawn, leading to nowhere. These are the quiet mysteries that cling to the island. With each breath of wind through the marsh grass, one might wonder if it's the sigh of those lost voices. Roanoke invites us to lean in and listen, to feel both the wonder and the chill of a story that refuses to fade. And so, in this gentle darkness, we begin our slow journey into that lingering question that hangs in the salt air. What happened here? Long ago, in the summer of 1587, a band of English settlers set foot on the sandy shores of Roanoke Island. They were about 115 men, women and children, carrying with them hopes of a new life in the New World. Among them walked Governor John White, an artist and leader, and his daughter Eleanor Dare, who was pregnant with a child soon to make history. The native Algonquian people of the region watched these pale newcomers with cautious eyes. Some bridges had been built. Manteo, a CROATOAN Indian who had travelled across the ocean to England and back, befriended the colonists and acted as their guide. But other tribes remembered an earlier English expedition's harshness and grew wary, their legends speaking of thunderous sky people arriving on great wooden birds, the ships, and bringing trouble. The settlers found a ghost of a village waiting for them. Just 2 years before, an English outpost on Roanoke had been abandoned after harsh conflict and hunger. All that remained were quiet, empty huts, and the bleached bones of one unfortunate soldier half buried in weeds. They also knew that some of those earlier English soldiers had clashed bitterly with the local tribes, even killing a native chief in a misunderstanding, and that violence hung like a ghost over the island. This sight must have chilled the new colonists. Still, they raised their own cottages and a modest fort anew on that same clearing by the shore. Day by day, they laboured, felling oak trees for timber, digging a fresh well and patching thatched roofs, determined to make this new place a home. In August, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born on these distant shores. Her tiny wail mingled with the whispering pines, a hopeful sound amid uncertainty. A week later, they baptized the infant Virginia under the open sky, and on that same day they baptized Manteo, marking him as one of their own and naming him Lord of Roanoke, a rare bright moment of union between the two peoples. From the very start, life was fragile. The colony's supplies were meagre, and tensions with some of the native peoples simmered just beyond the tree line. One of the colonists was found dead near the water's edge not long after their arrival, a victim of what seemed to be a hostile arrow in the dawn light. Fear settled over the little settlement like an evening fog. By day the colonists tilled soil and repaired their cabins. By night they gathered close around fires, keenly aware of the vast wilderness pressing in. In the flicker of torchlight, every distant twig snap could be a lurking stranger or some spirit of the woods. The friendly CROATOAN people, living on a neighbouring island, spoke of spirits in these lands, powers of the forest and sea that could be both protector and trickster. The English listened, hearts quickening, for they had their own old country superstitions and Bible tales swirling in their minds. In this meeting of worlds, every shadow held a story. As summer turned to fall, Governor John White made a painful decision. The colony desperately needed more food, tools and hands to help. It was agreed that White would sail back to England to gather supplies, leaving behind his family, his daughter Eleanor, son-in-law Ananias and baby Virginia, and all the others, with promises to return in a few months. Imagine the heavy silence on the day he departed, the surf breaking on the beach as he said farewell to his weeping loved ones, the uncertainty in every goodbye. The ship's sails caught the wind, and White watched Roanoke Island grow small against the horizon, never dreaming it would be the last time he'd see those faces. However, fate intervened cruelly. Back in England, a great war erupted, the Spanish Armada surged against English shores, and every ship was conscripted for defence. John White's pleas to return to his struggling colony were drowned out by the cannons of war. Weeks turned to months, months to years. All the while, across the ocean on Roanoke, the settlers carried on as best they could. They must have scanned the empty sea each day, praying for the sight of sails bringing their governor back with help. Hunger and uncertainty deepened. Perhaps they planted crops that withered in drought. Indeed, modern science would later reveal that a severe drought gripped the region in those years, browning the corn and emptying streams. Perhaps they tried to fish and found the waters stubbornly bare. With each passing season, hope would have waned, like a candle burning low. Nearly 3 years crawled by before John White finally secured passage on a ship and raced back to Roanoke. It was August 1590 when his feet once more touched the sand of that island, a symbolic homecoming on little Virginia's 3rd birthday. But instead of laughter and homecoming embraces, White was greeted by a graveyard silence. As his party walked up from the beach, they found the settlement eerily empty. The buildings and houses the colonists had built were gone, not ruined by violence or fire, but dismantled as if carefully taken apart. Weeds and wild vines crawled over the abandoned site. No smoke rose from any hearth. No voices answered their shouts of greeting. John White's heart pounded as he rushed to the place where his home had stood. Nothing but the sound of the wind in the trees and his own breath. There was no sign of a battle, no corpses, no obvious calamity. It was as if the Roanoke colonists had evaporated into the very air, carrying with them their belongings and leaving behind only heavy objects that were too burdensome to travel with. White and his men searched in disbelief. They found chests of tools and books that had been buried in hopes of preservation, now dug up and scattered, perhaps by local tribes or scavengers. As the sun slanted low, White came upon a single clue carved into a wooden post, the word CROATOAN cut in bold letters. Nearby on a tree, 3 letters CRO had been etched as well. White stared at these carvings and felt a small spark of relief and confusion. CROATOAN was the name of the island to the south, today called Hatteras Island, where the CROATOAN people lived, the very tribe of his friend Manteo. Before he had left in 1587, White and the colonists had agreed on a simple code. If they ever had to abandon the settlement under duress, they should carve a Maltese cross as a sign of distress. But White saw no cross accompanying the letters. The absence of a distress symbol suggested that perhaps the colonists had left on their own accord, not in desperate flight. Night was falling as White absorbed this discovery. He knew CROATOAN meant the friendly village of Manteo's people. Could it be that, after waiting in vain for rescue, the colonists had decided to seek shelter with their allies? It seemed a hopeful possibility that his daughter, granddaughter, and all the others might be alive and safe, welcomed by the CROATOAN tribe about 50 miles away. White was determined to sail to that island and find them. But the sea had other plans. Even as his ship prepared to head south, a ferocious storm blew in without warning. A gale churned the Atlantic waters, nearly wrecking his ship and forcing him to flee for the open ocean. The thunder of that storm must have echoed the despair in White's heart, as Roanoke faded once more into the distance, its secret still intact. With supplies low and crew anxious, the ship turned back toward England. John White would never set eyes on his colony again, the fate of those left. Behind on Roanoke remained a haunting question mark. Over the years and decades that followed, whispers spread through the colonies and among sailors. English settlers in Jamestown, established in 1607 not far up the coast, heard rumours from native contacts that a few pale-skinned people from Roanoke might have survived. One story told by American Indians was that the Roanoke colonists had indeed moved south to live alongside the CROATOAN tribe, becoming part of their villages and taking new names. Another rumour, darker in tone, reached Jamestown's governor. It claimed the settlers had wandered far and were killed by a powerful chief of a mainland tribe, perhaps as retribution for past conflicts. Yet these were second-hand tales, impossible to verify. The only certain trace of the lost colony was that single carved word pointing toward CROATOAN. It was as if the colonists had walked into legend. In the absence of definite answers, folklore began to take root, entwining itself with a few known facts. The mystery of Roanoke became fertile soil for the imagination. Among the Algonquian-speaking natives, some myths quietly absorbed the colonists' fate. One cautionary tale told of a malevolent spirit dwelling on Roanoke Island that could transform people into animals or even trees. Perhaps this story arose to explain how an entire village might vanish into the wilderness itself, taken by the island's spirit. European settlers, for their part, spun their own tales whenever a campfire burned low. The most famous legend was that of Virginia Dare, the white doe. In this later folklore, the little girl supposedly survived and grew up among the CROATOAN people who adopted her. She became a maiden of remarkable grace. But a jealous native sorcerer, so the story goes, cast a spell to change Virginia into a snow-white deer. For years after, hunters in the woods whispered of glimpsing a ghostly white doe that could never be caught. Finally, one fateful day, a CROATOAN warrior who loved Virginia shot the deer with a blessed arrow to break the curse, at the very same moment that another hunter's silver bullet struck true. The white doe collapsed. When the mist cleared, the hunters found the body of Virginia herself lying still upon the forest floor. Her grandfather, John White, arriving in the story just in time, cradled his lost granddaughter as she passed away, transformed back to human, only to die. In this poetic telling, he had lost her not once, but twice. Of course, this was only a story, a mournful attempt to give shape to the unknown, perhaps to grant Virginia a gentle ending in legend since reality offered none. Yet such legends carried kernels of truth wrapped in magic. They hinted that perhaps Virginia Dare and her fellow colonists did go to live among native friends, adapting to a new life, even if their ultimate fate was tragic. Other whispers over the years spoke of ghostly English figures seen wandering the woods in later years, or the sound of voices singing English hymns deep in the swamps where no settlers should be. Some early colonists in later decades claimed to have met indigenous people with grey eyes, who greeted them in broken English or with European names, hints that the bloodlines and language of Roanoke might have quietly mingled into the local tribes. All these stories, factual or fanciful, kept the flame of Roanoke's mystery alive. Thus, the historical record gives us a tale with a beginning and a middle, but no clear end. The real events, the voyage, the settlement, the carved message, and White's fruitless search provide the scaffolding. Around this framework, fear and hope built a web of colourful possibilities. The settlers of Roanoke lived and vanished on the threshold between history and myth, leaving behind only fragments, a word carved in wood, a ruined fort overgrown by vines, second-hand stories, and dreams of a white deer at the edge of the dark forest. With this background in mind, the stage is set for the next chapter. The modern world would take up the search for answers, and the tale of Roanoke would grow even stranger with time. The lost colony of Roanoke did not fade quietly from memory. For generations, people have hunted for any scrap of evidence, any hint of what became of those men, women, and children. The mystery, like a pesky phantom, refused to rest. As early as the 1600s, when the Jamestown colony took root not far away, search parties were sent and questions asked. Reports trickled in from Native American informants. An old tale that a great chief to the north, the Powhatan, had massacred some strangers years before. Another tale that a few English had been sheltered by friendly tribes inland. Captain John Smith of Jamestown wrote of hearing that some of the Roanoke colonists might still be alive among the tribes, but when he tried to find them, nothing concrete emerged. These second-hand stories only added layers to the mystery. Centuries passed, yet the legend of the lost colony only grew. By the 1700s and 1800s, some local families in coastal Carolina quietly claimed that the blood of Roanoke ran in their veins. John Lawson, an English explorer in 1701, recorded an intriguing encounter on Hatteras Island, formerly CROATOAN. He met villagers with grey eyes who spoke of ancestors who could speak from a book, possibly a reference to reading, something the Croatan people might have learned from English refugees. Lawson noted that some of the Hatteras people's words and surnames sounded oddly English. Could these be the descendants of the colonists blended into the tribe? The idea took hold in the local imagination. Interestingly, later researchers noted that some family names of the Roanoke colonists, Dare for instance and Cooper, appeared among the native communities in inland North Carolina in the centuries after. The Lumbee tribe in particular has an oral tradition that some of their ancestors were survivors of the lost colony. 19th century documents show that certain Lumbee people had grey eyes and English surnames, and they spoke English at a time when their neighbours did not. In 1885, North Carolina even officially recognised the Lumbee as CROATOAN Indians, reflecting that popular belief in a Roanoke connection. Though concrete proof is elusive, such stories have kept the idea of assimilation alive through the generations. The 20th century brought dramatic twists to the search. In 1937, a California man travelling through a rural part of North Carolina claimed to discover a mossy stone with strange inscriptions. Chiselled into its face was a message written in old-fashioned English that seemed to be from Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter and the mother of Virginia. It appeared to tell a tragic story, that most of the colonists, including little Virginia, had died from war and sickness, and that Eleanor carved this stone to leave word for her father should he ever return. Over the next few years, dozens more of these so-called Dare stones turned up, tracing a trail southward into Georgia. They detailed an arduous journey and the deaths of the colonists one by one. For a brief moment, the world thought the riddle of Roanoke might be solved. However, scrutiny by historians soon cast doubt. The language on many stones seemed too modern. The timing of their discovery was suspicious. One stone's inscription read that only 7 colonists were left alive by 1591 and that they had gone to heaven, a tale too conveniently aligning with what people expected to find. One by one, the Dare stones were deemed likely forgeries, an elaborate hoax playing on people's hopes. Yet, to this day, some hold out hope that the very first stone might just be genuine, clinging to the possibility that a grieving mother's message really was left in stone somewhere under the Carolina pines. While documents and legends tantalized, scientists and archaeologists rolled up their sleeves to dig for truth in the earth. Over the last few decades, researchers have uncovered physical clues that paint fragments of a picture. On Hatteras Island, the old CROATOAN island, archaeologists sifting through soil at native village sites found objects that simply didn't belong there, unless English colonists had been present. From beneath layers of sand and thyme emerged a heavy brass signet ring emblazoned with a lion, perhaps once worn on an English settler's finger. They found gun parts rusted with age, the barrel of an old musket, and a fragment of a slate that might have been used for writing, all mingled with Native American arrowheads and pottery. These discoveries suggest that some of the Roanoke settlers did indeed go to live among the CROATOAN people, sharing their lives and leaving traces of English tools and possessions in native homes. Perhaps entire families packed up and made the journey south, choosing integration over starvation. Another compelling lead came not from the coast, but from inland forests and fields. Archaeologists with the First Colony Foundation in recent years turned their attention to a different clue, a patch on an old map. Governor John White, after returning to England, had drawn a detailed map of the region. Centuries later, researchers examining that aged parchment noticed a tiny symbol concealed under a patch of paper near the confluence of 2 rivers on the mainland. It looked like the outline of a fort or settlement, deliberately hidden. Following this subtle sign, digs were undertaken in that area. There, near the Chowan River in Bertie County, North Carolina, pieces of Elizabethan-era pottery called borderware were unearthed, of the exact style known to have been used by the Roanoke colonists in the 1580s. Not far away, another spot dubbed Site Y yielded similar finds. Bits of pottery, a bit of a sword blade, a clasp from a wooden chest, and other telltale remnants of 16th century English life. Both locations are near what was once a native village. These inland discoveries hint that a group of the colonists might have struck out westward, settling for a time along the Albemarle Sound, perhaps among friendly natives there. The evidence is subtle, just fragments buried in the dirt, but it matches what could have been a small contingent of survivors making a new home away from the coast. From these findings, a theory emerges that the lost colonists did not all meet one single fate. They may have split into smaller groups, some travelling southward to live with the CROATOAN on Hatteras Island, others journeying inland to seek fertile land and friendly allies. Over time, these groups likely intermarried with their native hosts, and gradually their distinct English identities blurred into the larger fabric of indigenous communities. This would mean that the colonists were lost, not in the sense of vanishing into thin air, but rather lost to their English countrymen, absorbed into a new culture, leaving no obvious trace as a separate colony. It is a plausible, even hopeful scenario, and modern science has attempted to verify it by other means. Starting in 2007, researchers began collecting DNA samples from local families in coastal North Carolina, hoping to find genetic links between living people and those 16th century English settlers or local tribes. If a match were found, perhaps a sequence of genes suggesting a common ancestor, it could be the key to confirming that assimilation took place. So far, however, DNA evidence has been inconclusive. The centuries muddle the genetic signals, and no definitive Roanoke genes have announced themselves. The silence of the data echoes the silence John White met under the oaks of Roanoke. Even the very ground of Roanoke Island itself holds hints and frustrations. Some archaeologists believe that parts of the colony settlement site have long since eroded into the surrounding waters. The island's coastline has shifted over 400 years, and what was shoreline in 1587 may now lie under the gentle lapping waves. If timbers or graves were once there, they may have been taken by the sea. This makes the lost colony even harder to pin down. Nature itself might have hidden some evidence forever, and so experts carefully dig where they can, both on Roanoke and in likely areas nearby, every find given a small piece of the puzzle but never the whole picture. For every clue that emerged, a new question sprouted. A ring, a shard of pottery, a faded map. Each artifact tells a sliver of a story, but none definitively spell out the ending. The mystery of Roanoke endures, refusing to surrender all its secrets. In modern times, it has become a favourite subject of historians, archaeologists and curious adventurers. They convene at conferences to compare notes on carbon-dated artefacts. They trek through mosquito-thick swamps and windswept dunes, chasing rumours of lost villages. And they peer at old documents in archives, hoping a forgotten letter or Spanish report might yet detail the colonists' fate. Yet, like a will-o'-the-wisp in the misty woods, the answer seems always just out of reach. Even after all these investigations and discoveries, we still do not have a tidy conclusion. There are possibilities, tantalising hints, but no final chapter. The lost colony of Roanoke continues to haunt us because of this very uncertainty. It sits at the edge of the knowable, where fact and speculation blur, and in that half-light our imaginations are free to wander. Up to now, we have followed the colony's story through records and relics, but dates and clues alone cannot capture the heartbeat of those vanished lives. To truly sense what the lost colonists might have experienced, we must step deeper into their world, into their nights and their dreams. Before we weigh the theories of their fate, let us pause and listen to a few imagined echoes from Roanoke's final days. Through these brief personal accounts, we may catch a whisper of how it felt to live this mystery from the inside. Autumn, 1587. The nights come a little crisper now, darkness falling early over the settlement of Roanoke. A young settler named Thomason sits by the faint glow of a campfire, a wool blanket around his shoulders. The rest of the colony sleeps fitfully in their crude cottages, but Thomason has volunteered for the late watch. He stirs the embers with a stick, sending a swirl of orange sparks up into the starry sky. The forest beyond the flickering light is ink black and hushed. As he listens to the chirr of crickets and the distant lap of waves, Thomason's mind wanders to thoughts of home across the sea. Did he make the right choice coming here? Will Governor White really return with supplies before winter? He feeds another twig to the fire and tries to chase away those worries. As he gazes into the flames, his thoughts wander uneasily. Only a few days ago they had buried one of their own, a man found slain by arrows at the edge of the marsh. Thomason can still recall the grief and terror in camp that day, and the sight of a fresh grave in the sand. The possibility of unseen foes lurking beyond the palisade haunts him. He whispers a fragment of a psalm under his breath, steadying his nerves. He must remain vigilant. He must not let fear get the better of him. The wind picks up ever so slightly, a breeze sighing through the pines. In the rustling of leaves, Thomason almost fancies he hears a voice. He cocks his head, listening intently. It sounded like someone calling his name from just beyond the tree line. Thomason. The whisper is so soft he's not sure it isn't simply the wind squeezing through the palisade timbers. He stands slowly, every sense alert. Behind him, the dying fire casts long, wavering shadows. He peers toward the dark tree line where the moonlight trickles through tangled branches and brambles. Is anyone there? He calls in a low tone, not wishing to rouse the others unless needed. There is no answer, only a return to silence. Thomason's heart beats faster. He knows most of the friendly CROATOAN natives have departed back to their island for now. Any other local tribes would not likely approach so silently without torchlight. He takes a hesitant step forward, beyond the circle of firelight. The cold autumn leaves crackle under his boot. All at once, from that impenetrable darkness, comes a sound, the snap of a twig, as if trodden. Underfoot. Thomason's breath catches. About 20 paces ahead, between two tree trunks, he thinks he sees a shape, a human figure standing very still. It almost blends with the night, a darker shadow among shadows. Thomason calls out more firmly this time, "Who goes there?" His voice sounds small under the canopy of gigantic trees. Again, no answer. The figure, if it is a figure, does not move. For a moment Thomason wonders if his eyes are playing tricks. Fear pricks at the back of his neck like icy needles. He takes another step forward, one hand reaching to touch the hilt of the hunting knife at his belt. Just then, the clouds uncover a sliver of moon. Pale light filters down, and the grove of oaks comes into sharper relief. There is no figure at all now, only gnarled branches and clumps of shadow. Thomason lets out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Perhaps a tree stump was what he saw, or perhaps someone was truly there and slipped away unseen. He feels a sudden urge to retreat to the safety of the fireside. As he turns, something on the ground catches his eye, a patch of white in the carpet of fallen leaves at the forest's edge. Crouching down, he discovers it is a small bundle of feathers tied with twine resting in the dirt. He lifts it curiously. It's a little charm of some sort, like the ones he's seen the native medicine men carry. Did someone leave this here just now? A gift or a warning? His skin prickles at the thought. He stands up again and scans the silent woods. The only movement comes from the sway of distant treetops in the breeze, and the only sound is the gentle hiss of his lonely fire behind him. Thomason backs away slowly, the talisman clutched in his fingers. He resolves to show it to Mantillo or the others in the morning. For now he returns to the circle of orange light, adding a couple of logs to revive the flames. The darkness beyond the camp seems to press in heavily, as if disappointed. Thomason settles onto a log, laying his knife across his lap. He will not fall asleep tonight, he vows. With watchful eyes he keeps vigil, but nothing else stirs in the woods. Only the wind continues to murmur, carrying secrets in a language he does not understand. When dawn finally peaks grey and cold over the horizon, Thomason releases a long breath. He cannot be sure whether anything he witnessed was real or just a product of exhaustion and the eeriness of this wild land. Clutching the strange bundle of feathers, he whispers a prayer under his breath for protection. Out here, on the edge of the known world, he feels truly watched by the wilderness, by spirits, or perhaps by the ghosts of those 15 men who vanished before his group arrived. He does not know. He only knows that in this moment the new world feels immense and unknowable, and he is very small beneath the ancient trees. Winter, 1587. Frost silvers the ground on Roanoke Island. Under a sky scattered with icy stars, Manteo walks alone into the forest. The English colonists, his new brethren by oath, are asleep back in their huts, huddling together for warmth. Manteo pulls his deerskin cloak tighter around his shoulders. His breath plumes white in the cold as he makes his way to an ancient oak that stands not far from the settlement. In one hand he carries a small woven basket filled with offerings, a few kernels of corn, a carved shell pendant, and a pinch of tobacco. In the other hand he holds a smouldering bundle of sage, its fragrant smoke curling upward. He is troubled tonight. Only days ago one of the Englishmen was found slain by the water, pierced by arrows. Tensions between the colonists and the mainland tribe have reached a dangerous high. Manteo, as both a CROATOAN tribesman and a friend to the English, feels the weight of responsibility on his chest. He had hoped his people and these newcomers could coexist peacefully, but fear and misunderstanding have been spreading like a sickness. The English are anxious and armed. The tribes around Roanoke whisper that these colonists bring bad luck or hidden schemes. Manteo stops at the base of the great oak, a tree so old his own grandfather once called it the elder of the forest. By the dim moonlight he can just make out strange markings on its bark, older than anyone remembers. This place is holy, a crossing point between the seen and unseen. Manteo bows his head and closes his eyes. First, he prays in the new way he learned in England, murmuring the Lord's Prayer in halting English, invoking the Christian God to watch over both his CROATOAN kin and the English families now under his care. He can still recall the echoing stone chapel in London, where he first recited these words, far from the whispering trees of Roanoke. He makes the sign of the cross as John White taught him, but when he opens his eyes the night remains silent and still, as cold and inscrutable as ever. So Manteo falls to his knees and places the basket of offerings at the tree's gnarled roots. In his native tongue he begins to chant an old prayer to the land, to the spirit his people believe dwells in this island. "Father of the forest, hear me," he whispers in the Algonquian tongue, voice trembling slightly. "We mean no harm. These strangers are my friends. Please, if we have angered you, accept this token and protect us all from what is to come." He sprinkles the corn and tobacco at the base of the oak and wafts the sage smoke around the trunk in slow circles. The scent mingles with the crisp smell of winter. For a long moment, nothing happens. Manteo presses his palms to the frozen ground and listens. A distant owl cries, its hoot echoing through the trees. The wind stirs the brittle leaves. He feels nothing but the bite of the cold seeping through his knees. Perhaps, he thinks, the spirits here do not heed him, or perhaps they are already too displeased. A heavy sense of dread settles in his stomach. Suddenly a gust of wind slithers through the clearing, and the sage bundle in his hand flares, then dies. The offering basket tumbles over, the shell pendant rolling out into the moonlight. Manteo starts, steadying himself with one hand on the oak's trunk. The wind ceases just as abruptly, but now the woods feel different, watchful. He senses a presence, as tangible as a pair of eyes on his back. Slowly, Manteo turns his head to glance behind him. At first, he sees only darkness between the columns of pines. Then, deep in the knotted shadows, he notices a shape. It is low to the ground, pale, perhaps an animal. 2 points of dim light resemble eyes reflecting starlight. A chill colder than the winter air grips Manteo's spine. The shape is that of a wolf, or so it seems. Unusually large, its fur nearly white or silver. It stands utterly still, watching him. Manteo's lips move in a silent chant, an instinctive prayer to keep evil at bay. The silver wolf does not growl or advance. It simply gazes at him with those faintly gleaming eyes that seem filled with ancient intelligence. Manteo blinks, and in that blink the creature is gone, as if the darkness itself swallowed it up. Only the faint rustle of bushes hints that something real was ever there. Heart-pounding, Manteo turns back to the oak and bows his head deeply. Whether it was a spirit or just a curious animal matters little. He takes it as an answer nonetheless. The island has given him a sign, one he cannot quite decipher, except to know that a decision must be made soon. Gathering his things, Manteo whispers a final plea. "Guide me to do what is right," he says in Algonquian, touching the tree's bark. The old markings in the wood catch a beam of moonlight. One briefly looks to him like the outline of a bird in flight. Manteo rises and steps back from the sacred oak. In his mind, he already knows what he must urge the colonists to do. If they are to survive, they may need to leave this place, to travel to CROATOAN Island, where his people can help shelter them. The thought gives him a small measure of hope amid the fear. Casting one last glance at the dark forest, where the white wolf or spirit had been, Manteo makes his way quietly back toward the settlement. The night feels bitter, but not empty. He senses unseen figures in the woods watching his retreat. Whether they are the spirits of the land or enemy scouts, he cannot tell. Perhaps they are both. When Manteo slips back inside the fragile palisade walls, he finds the fire at the colony's centre has. Burned low, a few red coals glowing in the ash, he takes a deep breath and releases it into the darkness. Tomorrow, by first light, he will speak to the remaining leaders. He will tell them it might be time to carve a message, gather what they can, and move everyone to safer ground. As he settles down by the embers to warm his hands, Manteo feels caught between two worlds, but also guided, he hopes, by the best of both. Above him, through the bare branches, the stars glitter coldly. He whispers to himself in English this time, testing the words on his tongue. CROATOAN Island. CROATOAN. The wind carries the name into the night, and the forest beyond the fence gives no reply. Summer, 1589. The air lies heavy and humid over Roanoke Island, filled with the drone of insects. Inside a small timber cottage, Eleanor Dare watches her young daughter Virginia sleeping in a crude cradle. The child's cheeks are flushed in the summer heat, but she rests peacefully for the moment. Eleanor gently rocks the cradle with her foot, humming a lullaby under her breath. An old English tune her mother sang to her when she was a girl. The melody is soft and wistful, a comfort amid the trials of this strange land. Outside the open door, dusk is gathering, painting the sky in dusky purples and reds. Eleanor's husband is out with a hunting party, and most of the colony's men are still in the woods or by the shore trying to gather food before nightfall. Here in the dim interior, Eleanor feels alone with her thoughts. For a moment, Eleanor's mind drifts back to her girlhood in England, recalling warm evenings by a hearth, the comforting murmur of familiar voices from beyond the parlour door. That world feels impossibly far now. Here in this half-wild land, life has been pared down to survival and hope, yet in Virginia's sleeping face she finds the courage to carry. On, as her song tapers off, the baby stirs. Little Virginia is nearly 2 years old now, toddling about by day, chattering in baby words. She has known only this island as home. Eleanor often wonders what will become of her daughter in a place so far from England, without the comforts and certainties Eleanor once knew. She sighs and touches the tiny cross necklace Virginia wears, a keepsake John White gave his granddaughter as an infant. It glints faintly in the low light. Outside, the colour is draining from the sky. Through the doorway, Eleanor can see the central fire of the settlement being stoked for the evening meal. A few women pass by carrying bundles of kindling. She can hear their weary murmurs. Just then, Virginia's eyes pop open. The toddler isn't looking at her mother, but past her, toward the door. A delighted smile spreads on the child's face as she sits up and reaches her little arms outward. "What is it, my love?" Eleanor whispers, turning her head to follow the baby's gaze. In the twilight gloom, she sees no one there. Perhaps one of the settlers has come to the door. But the threshold is empty. Virginia gives a small giggle, still staring intently at the open doorway. It is the kind of laugh she makes when a beloved face appears, the kind she gives her father or grandfather. In fact, she is babbling now in excitement, the way she did when John White would play peekaboo with her. "Da! Papa!" Virginia claps, bouncing in her cradle. Eleanor's heart skips. In the fading light, a tall shadow falls across the threshold, and for one dizzying second she imagines it is her father, Governor White, returned at last, stepping into the cottage with arms outstretched. Eleanor blinks and the shadow flickers. Nothing is there. Only an illusion caused by the fire outside as a colonist walks past with a torch. The laughter of her child dwindles to an impatient whine when no one comes. Virginia looks up at her mother in confusion, as if to say, "Where did they go?" Eleanor's skin prickles with gooseflesh despite the warm night. She lifts Virginia from the cradle and holds her close. The little girl squirms, reaching still toward the door over her mother's shoulder. Eleanor steps to the doorway and peers out. The yard is empty at that moment. Most people are further down by the cooking fire. Long shadows stripe the ground. A sudden urge overcomes her, an impulse to walk out past the cabins toward the woods. At the edge of the clearing, she carries Virginia on her hip, following the direction of the child's outstretched arm. The evening is strangely quiet. Even the cicadas have paused. The sky above is a deep indigo now, a few stars beginning to blink awake. As Eleanor approaches the tree line, Virginia gives a soft coo and leans eagerly forward in her arms. Eleanor's breath catches in her throat. There, just under the boughs of a great oak, stands a snow-white deer. Its coat gleams ghost-like in the dimness. The creature is utterly still, watching mother and child with dark, liquid eyes. Eleanor has seen deer on the island before, but never one so pale. It practically glows. She feels frozen in place, meeting the animal's gaze. Virginia makes a happy sound and waves a tiny hand toward the doe, as if greeting an old friend. The deer's ears twitch. Slowly, it lowers its head, almost in a nod. Eleanor's heart pounds. She cannot tell if she's frightened or mesmerized. She opens her mouth to call to it gently, but before any sound comes out, the white doe turns and bounds silently into the trees. Its form vanishes into the dusk as if it had never been. Eleanor realizes she's trembling. Little Virginia begins to fuss, disappointed that the gentle presence is gone. Backing away from the woods, Eleanor returns to the glow of the settlement's fires. A couple of neighbours cast curious looks her way. A woman carrying water asks with concern, "Are you all right, dear?" Eleanor musters a faint smile and nods, thanking her. She does not mention what she saw. The words feel too strange to say aloud. Clutching her daughter tightly, Eleanor re-enters her cabin and closes the door. That night, Eleanor has trouble falling asleep. When Virginia finally dozes in her arms, Eleanor still lies awake on her straw pallet, eyes wide open, listening to the night. In her mind, she keeps seeing that serene white doe and the way it looked at them almost knowingly. She thinks of her father across the ocean, how badly she wishes him back, how everything might have been different if he'd returned on time. Eventually, exhaustion overtakes her. In a half-dreaming state, Eleanor imagines the white deer standing guard outside her door, a silent protector keeping vigil through the darkest hours. Somehow, in spite of her fear, this thought gives her comfort. The forest no longer seems completely hostile. It is as if something or someone out there cares for her child, watching over them from just beyond the firelight. In a final drowsy whisper, Eleanor breathes a soft amen and drifts into a restless, dream-filled sleep. August 1590, a 3. Year absence ends in silence. Governor John White steps ashore onto Roanoke Island under a sky of iron grey clouds. The wind tastes of coming rain. Behind him, a few sailors from the anchored ship follow hesitantly, their boots sinking into the damp sand. White's heart is thundering in his chest as he takes in the familiar tree line and the faint path that leads toward the settlement site. He had imagined this homecoming so many times. In countless daydreams during his delay in England, he had pictured smoke rising from cottage chimneys and little Virginia running to meet him, toddling on sturdy legs. His daughter Eleanor rushing to greet him. His infant granddaughter grown into a laughing toddler. The colonist laughing and sighing with relief around him. But now, as he pushes through wet underbrush, an eerie stillness envelops everything. Not a single voice carries on the breeze. No smoke curls from cooking fires. "Hello," White calls out, striding ahead of the others. "Ananias, Eleanor, we're here. It's John White." His own voice comes back to him, muffled by the dense, humid air. The trail opens into the clearing where the colony had stood. White stops in his tracks, confusion knifing through him. The clearing is nearly empty. Where once had been a cluster of rough wooden houses and a sturdy fort, there are now only remnants. A few sun-bleached posts jutting from the ground, and the outline of what might have been a defensive palisade. Weeds and wild vines snake over disturbed earth that might have been gardens. It is as if the entire village has simply vanished. White feels the blood drain from his face. He walks forward, barely, noticing that the sailors hang back nearer the tree line, whispering to each other. In a daze, he approaches one of the remaining upright posts, a corner post of the fort if memory serves. Something catches his eye, carved into the grey wood. Letters. He steps closer, hope flaring in his chest. The letters read CROATOAN in clear, bold strokes. White runs his fingers over the carving, the grooves rough beneath his touch. CROATOAN. Instantly he recalls the plan. If the colonists had to relocate, they would carve their destination. CROATOAN Island. Of course. That is where Manteo's people live, where they'd find welcome. White's eyes search the timber for the shape of a cross, the distress symbol they'd agreed upon to signal danger or coercion. There is none. The absence of a cross steadies his pulse a little. It means they left by choice, not by attack, if this carving is truly from them. CROATOAN, he murmurs aloud. Could it really be so simple? Had they gone there to wait for him? White turns and shouts to the sailors. They've moved to CROATOAN. It says CROATOAN. He tries to keep the tremble of joyous relief out of his voice. A couple of men venture forward now, encouraged that no threat seems present. White and the others begin to search the area for further clues. At the spot where his house once stood, White finds a litter of broken barrels and a few iron kettle fragments. Nearby, he discovers one of his own chests that he had buried for safekeeping. Dug up and ransacked, its contents, books, maps, portraits, ruined by weather and animals. He lifts a mildewed page that once held his watercolour sketches of the New World. The image is blurred beyond recognition. White's throat tightens. It is all too much. The empty settlement, the hints of hardship. He can only imagine what his family endured here, waiting and waiting. He sinks to one knee in the trampled grass, overcome with guilt and fear. The sailors move about quietly, their eyes darting as if expecting ghosts. One man calls out from near an old oak tree, "Sir, over here!" White rises and rushes over. On the tree's trunk they find another carving, the letters CRO, just that fragment. Did the colonists begin to carve the word twice, or start a second word that remains unfinished? White runs a hand over the rough bark, a frown creasing his brow. Perhaps it was meant to be CROATOAN again, or something else. The enigma sends a shiver through him. Above, the sky growls with distant thunder. Fat droplets of rain begin to patter down on the forlorn campsite. White knows they have little time. The ship's captain had warned him they must set sail soon to avoid the approaching storm season. Still, he can hardly bear to leave so quickly when he's only just found this ghost village. "We should go, Governor," one of the sailors urges, eyeing the darkening clouds. White opens his mouth to protest, but a sudden gust lashes the trees and a fork of lightning splits the sky in the distance. A storm is imminent, one that could wreck their anchored ship if they tarry. With a heavy, hollow feeling in his chest, John White gathers the few forlorn items he can carry, a pewter cup here, a rusted sword hilt there, keepsakes of lives uprooted, and heads back toward the beach. Rain is falling in earnest now, drenching his hair and cape. He stops once at the edge of the clearing, turning back for one last long look. The carved word CROATOAN is visible on the post even through the curtain of rain, resolute and haunting. White whispers a desperate prayer. Please let it be true. Let them be safe at CROATOAN. Lightning flashes, and for a split second, he almost imagines figures in the downpour, as if shapes move among the trees at the far end of the clearing watching him. He blinks, and they're gone, if they were ever there. Only raindrops dance among the ferns. Soaked and heartbroken, White trudges back to the waiting boat. The sailors push off, rowing with strong strokes as waves churn around them. From the longboat, White keeps his eyes fixed on Roanoke Island until it blurs in the grey veil of storm. He thinks of little Virginia. Today is her 3rd birthday, if she is alive. He recalls the tiny face he kissed goodbye, now a faint memory against the harsh reality of emptiness he found. Thunder booms overhead. White does not even flinch. In his lap he carries a single parting gift from the island, a single plank of wood, taken from the ruined fort into which CROATOAN is carved. He runs his thumb over the letters, rainwater trickling down his sleeve. The meaning of it all escapes him, as distant as the lightning now illuminating the forsaken shore. The governor's eyes brim with tears that mingle with the rain on his cheeks. Roanoke Island offers no answers, only a final whisper in the form of that single word. With a shuddering breath, John White bows his head. In the roar of the storm, he silently vows that somehow, someday, he will find out what became of his beloved family and colony. The promise drifts from his lips, unheard in the tempest, as the boat carries him away from the land that holds its secrets fast. The hurricane's wrath would soon drive White's ship back out to sea, thwarting his desperate plan to sail onto CROATOAN Island. Fate, it seems, will not yet allow him even a glimpse of where his people have gone. Roanoke recedes into the grey distance, and John White is left with unanswered prayers and a mystery that will torment him for the rest of his days. What then truly happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? In the quiet of night, when one turns this question over gently in the mind, a tapestry of possibilities unfolds. On one side are the grounded, logical explanations, the ones that point to natural hardships and human decisions. On the other side are the whispers of the uncanny, ideas that venture beyond ordinary history into the realm of legend and the supernatural. Both realms of interpretation have their allure, and each provides a different kind of answer to this enduring riddle. From a practical perspective, it is not hard to imagine a series of very human events leading to the colony's end. The settlers were marooned in a challenging environment. They faced dwindling supplies, likely crop failures from drought. Indeed, later tree ring analysis would reveal that 1,587 to 1,589 saw one of the worst droughts in centuries, which would have made food scarce and wells dry, and the ever-present uncertainty of living among potentially hostile neighbours. A simple and sensible scenario is that the colonists, after waiting hopelessly for rescue, made the decision to abandon Roanoke Island. They might have split into groups and sought refuge where they could find it. Some possibly sailed a crude vessel northward or southward along the coast, hoping to reach an English fishing fleet or another colony. If so, they may have been lost at sea, their fragile boats swallowed by storms on the endless Atlantic. Others, perhaps the majority, likely travelled to CROATOAN Island, Hatteras, or the mainland, where friendly tribes like the CROATOAN people or others of the Algonquian villages offered food and shelter. In doing so, the English would gradually become part of those communities, their old life slowly dissolving into a new one. This interpretation meshes with many of the clues we have. The carved word pointing to CROATOAN, the reports of European artifacts in native villages, the accounts of Native Americans with grey eyes and English names in later years. It paints a picture of a hard but ultimately hopeful outcome. Survival through adaptation. Other, down-to-earth theories offer bleaker twists. Perhaps conflict did catch up with the colonists after all. The region was not without dangers. The first Roanoke outpost had been menaced by warfare, and relations with some tribes were bitter. It is conceivable that some faction of local warriors, possibly retaliating for past grievances, attacked the Roanoke colony at some point, destroying it. The colonists could have been killed or taken captive. Indeed, one historical account claims that Chief Powhatan, a powerful leader in the Chesapeake area, confessed to ordering the slaughter of a group of Europeans living with a rival tribe around 1600, a story that some believe referred to the Roanoke settlers. Or a Spanish attack. Spaniards from the Spanish Florida colony had every reason to eliminate an English foothold in their sphere, might have descended upon them quietly. Indeed, one of the Roanoke colonists had deserted in the West Indies and reportedly told the Spanish about the settlement's location. In that scenario, soldiers from Spain's Florida base could have wiped out the colony and left no survivors or obvious traces. Disease, too, cannot be ruled out. An epidemic of some new illness might have swept through the vulnerable colonists and decimated them, leaving too few survivors to maintain the settlement. Those remaining might then have been forced to join native communities or perish. Such explanations are sober and plausible, and pieces of them might indeed form parts of the truth. Yet none of them, alone, feels completely satisfying. They either leave some evidence unexplained or rely on evidence long lost to time. Then there are the interpretations that step beyond the ordinary, the ones that tiptoe into the mysterious woods of possibility, where folklore and the paranormal cast flickering shadows. These ideas, while not supported by conventional evidence, seek to fill in the silence with imaginative answers. One eerily poetic notion is that the colony didn't die out or relocate at all, but rather crossed into a different plane of existence. In other words, the settlers of Roanoke vanished not because of starvation or violence, but because they were taken by the unknown. Some storytellers muse that perhaps the island itself, the ancient spirits revered by the native peoples, claim the colonists. Recall the legend of the malevolent spirit that could turn people into trees. Could the entire colony have fallen under such a spell, their bodies becoming silent oaks and pines? It's a fanciful thought, yet in the dark stillness one can almost envision those English men and women wandering into the forest one by one, drawn by phantom voices and slowly rooting into the earth as the forest closes around them. Others imagine a kind of time vortex or doorway in reality, the settlers stumbling through a veil between worlds that left nothing behind but empty buildings. In this scenario, Roanoke might be less a historical puzzle and more a ghost story, an entire community slipping into the fog, forever beyond reach. Among the supernatural theories, the word carved on that post, CROATOAN, has taken on a nearly mystical significance. Over the years, an uncanny lore has grown around that word, suggesting it is a kind of omen or key to the mystery. Stories, of uncertain truth, claim that the word CROATOAN has eerily appeared in other unexplained disappearances. It is said that in 1849, as the American writer Edgar Allan Poe lay delirious on his deathbed, he whispered CROATOAN before expiring. Why, no one knows. Rumours persist that the missing pilot Amelia Earhart, before her final flight in 1937, scribbled CROATOAN in her journal, as though a strange invocation. There are tales of an infamous stagecoach robber in the 1880s who carved CROATOAN into the wall of his prison cell just before he vanished after release, never to be seen again. Even a ghost ship found adrift off Cape Hatteras in 1912 was purported to have the word CROATOAN scratched into its logbook on the last otherwise blank page. Skeptics may dismiss these claims as hoaxes or coincidences, and indeed most historians find them dubious, but the fact that such tales flourish tells us something. It tells us that CROATOAN has become a symbol, a chilling cipher for things that are here one moment and gone the next. To the more imaginatively inclined, this lends weight to the idea that whatever happened at Roanoke was not a prosaic relocation at all, but something far more mystifying, even otherworldly. Perhaps the colonists invoked or encountered forces beyond their ken, and the word CROATOAN was left as a kind of final message or spell, either a plea for deliverance or a mark of where they went, be it CROATOAN Island or into the arms of a spirit named CROATOAN. Less fantastical but still paranormal are the many ghostly accounts surrounding Roanoke. Later generations of settlers in the area would sometimes speak of encountering pale apparitions in the forests, figures in antiquated clothing seen at a distance among the trees who melted away when approached. On quiet nights, some claimed, you could hear the faint strains of an English woman's voice carried on the breeze, or the laughter of children where none lived. One coastal fisherman in the 1690s even claimed he spotted ghostly figures dancing around a fire on the deserted island one moonlit night. But when a search party arrived the next day, they found only cold ashes arranged in a circle and a single set of footprints that led down to the empty beach. Such stories suggest that even if the flesh and blood colonists perished, their spirits might linger, unwilling or unable to leave the land where they last drew breath. There is even a legend that when the colonists realized they were doomed, they performed an occult ritual taught by Manteo's people to ensure their souls would transmigrate into the wild animals of the region, living on as birds, foxes or deer rather than dying as humans. In this way, the lost colony would not be truly lost, but transformed and hidden in plain sight whenever a white doe steps quietly between the pines or a crow caws at dusk. In truth, we will likely never know which, if any, of these theories is correct. The rational explanations have evidence on their side. They're supported by artifacts, historical accounts of drought and conflict, and the logical outcomes of desperate people doing what they must to survive. The supernatural explanations thrive in the void of proof, offering dramatic answers where facts are stubbornly missing. Most scholars lean towards some version of the mundane, that the colonists assimilated with native tribes, or perhaps met a tragic end due to human causes. But on a night like this, as the moonlight filters through Spanish moss and the story of Roanoke wraps around us, one might just feel that anything is possible. The mystery has endured not just because people vanished, but because they left room for our imaginations to wander. Scientific minds will continue testing bones and digging up relics, and spiritual minds will continue pondering curses and ghostly guardians. Roanoke sits quietly at the crossroads of fact and folklore, allowing each of us to take from it the story that speaks to our soul. In the end, whether the answer lies in careful adaptation to harsh reality, or in the uncanny workings of fate, the lost colony remains an enigma. Perhaps it is an enigma meant to remain, a reminder that not all of life's questions yield clear answers, and so, both the scholar and the dreamer can find in Roanoke something to wonder at, a puzzle of history, and a canvas for the imagination. Night deepens over the coast, and our journey through the shadows of Roanoke nears its end. We find ourselves once more at the water's edge of that silent island, caught in a liminal space, a threshold between what is known and what is imagined. The tale of the lost colony has carried us across this threshold, from recorded history into whispered legend, and now into a gentle contemplation of uncertainty. In this quiet moment, the absence of an answer feels almost sacred. The mystery of Roanoke is like the faint glow on the horizon after sunset, neither daylight nor full dark, but something in between that soothes the mind with its openness. On Roanoke Island today, the winds still murmur through the tall grass and ancient oaks. The same stars that once looked down on the hopeful settlers now shine upon empty fields and quiet woods. Perhaps those stars remember the people who gazed up at them with prayers on their lips. Perhaps the land itself holds an echo of laughter, of songs, of life, but only as much as a dream upon waking. Standing there, one might feel the veil between past and present as thin as a sigh. It's a place where you can almost sense that if you listened hard enough, the voices of Ellen Adair or John White might drift out of the salt air, faint and indistinct, yet comforting, as if to say we were here, we loved, we lived, and that too matters. In this soft darkness, we're reminded that some stories do not need a clear ending to impart their meaning. The story of Roanoke has stayed with us precisely because it did not end in tidy explanation. Instead, it trails off like a gentle lullaby, leaving a question hanging in the air, an unanswered chord that is oddly pleasing in its mystery. Not every page of history is filled in, and not every light in the forest can be identified. There is a special peace in accepting the unknown, in recognizing that the fate of the lost colony may be one more secret kept by time. As you lie here listening, perhaps with eyes growing heavy, consider that the unresolved nature of Roanoke's tale is part of its gift. It invites us to dream our own endings or simply let the wonder wash over us. In the world of this story, possibilities float like fireflies at dusk, each one small and flickering, briefly illuminating a what if before vanishing into the night. We don't chase them, we just appreciate their light. In the same way, we can let the myriad theories and legends of Roanoke glow softly in our minds without needing to capture them. The not knowing becomes a gentle lull in itself, a reminder that there are horizons beyond which our certainties cannot go, and that's all right. So we leave the lost colony where it resides, in that quiet twilight between fact and myth, between the waking world and dreams. The ocean will continue to whisper against the outer banks, telling the story too. The sands and shells and the pine trees will continue to stand guard, their needles shivering with each breeze as if in memory. Maybe somewhere, the spirits of those settlers have found their home at last, whether in another people's lives, in the embrace of the wilderness, or in some kindly other realm beyond our sight. Or maybe they simply became one with the island's soul, part of the endless song of this place. Our tale drifts to a close now, not with a grand finale, but with the gentle fading of a light. The mystery of Roanoke will remain, humming quietly in the background of history like the echo of a distant tide. And as it does, it reminds us of a profound truth. Perhaps not all stories are meant to have an ending. Some remain beautifully unfinished, letting each generation find in them wonder, caution, or inspiration. In the stillness of this night, we take comfort in that thought. The lost colony sleeps in the pages of time, and we too can surrender to the unknown, allowing ourselves to rest. Good night, dear mystery. Good night, Roanoke. May your secrets rock gently on the waves, and your memory drift softly in the moonlight, for as long as there are those who dream.